Breaking news today on Sekulow as the House passes a massive power grab for the Biden administration.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow.
It's fully paid for. Fully paid. It does not increase the deficit 1 single cent.
We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110.
Many of you said you were going to say no. You couldn't vote for it until you got the CBO score because you wanted to hold them accountable that it couldn't cost money. You got the CBO score. It cost $800 billion in the first 5 years.
And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
That was Kevin McCarthy there as he stood up during this vote in the House for the Build Back Better plan, the $2 trillion spending bill. When the CBO report did come back and say, this is not revenue neutral by any means. It's costing nearly $900 billion in its first 5 years because of all the spending here. Some of that spending we've talked about, $80 billion to the IRS to hire 87,000 new enforcement agents. Now, we did get a victory out of this because the House, if there was any place that they were going to try to slip this language in, it would have been in the House where they had the most support for Build Back Better. It was a party line vote. We'll talk about what could happen in the Senate next. But what did not make it in there is that $600 or that $10,000 in aggregate number that would allow the IRS to get into your bank account. Dad, we've already said if they try to do this, as they've talked about before, we can even play that bite later. If they try to do this through some kind of regulation, we believe that's a challenge that we will fight.
Yeah, because that would be changing the law, which you cannot change a law through a regulatory process. But so while there's a lot of problems with this bill, and we're going to get into it, including 87,000 new IRS agents for an agency that's still not fixed. But let's be clear that where the victory is, and we'll have to keep our eye on it because of the regulatory issue. But the issue we were concerned about that we raised, I testified before a congressional hearing, was this $600 a month and then became, $800 a month and then $10,000 over the course of a year, ability for the IRS to have your bank spying, for the IRS on your transactions. Then that is out of this legislation.
It's out of the legislation, Jay, and it's a big win. I mean, look, even in the midst of very problematic legislation, it's so important to dig in on the weeds on the most problematic provisions. Look, because of the American people standing up and say we will not tolerate this, they had to pull it out of the bill. Jay, I think there's going to be an opportunity in the United States Senate to also go after some of that overall funding increase that Jordan talked about. I know Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema are very concerned about those provisions. It did move out of the House largely on a party line vote. Only Jared Golden, he was the only Democrat to vote against the piece of legislation. But you're right, Jay. I mean, that IRS snooping provision, had it ended up in the House version originally passed, I think it would have been very difficult to remove. So even though there's going to be challenges going forward, getting that most problematic provision out of the House bill, Jay, that's really a huge win in the midst of a trying night here.
Yeah, I mean, this, again, folks, just to understand, has passed the House of Representatives. This has got a major uphill challenge in the Senate, and so this fight is not over. It's actually far from over because we have senators on the record on the Democrat Party who have said they're not going for this.
Well, in the House moderates, Jordan, the excuse that they said they were waiting on this CBO score, they didn't want it to cost anything. They wanted it to be revenue neutral. Well, Jordan, the CBO scores came back. It cost way more than the House said it would do, and it was nowhere close to revenue neutral, and yet all of them essentially held hands and voted for it anyway. Jordan, Joe Manchin's not going to do that. Now, he may vote for something in the end, but he's going to vote for a bill, if he does, that's dramatically different than this one. And look, our listeners are a smart group of people. They know what happens if the Senate passes a different bill than the House does. The House would have to look at it again, Jordan. So, look, we got a long way to go on this one.
Which could divide up the progressives and divide up the moderates. So here's where the pressure point moves. It moves to the Manchins and Sinemas of the U.S. Senate right now. It will take them standing up to, at least as Stan said, make major changes to this and then send it back to the House to see if they can actually get their act together again when it's not just their Green New Deal wish list. We'll be right back on Sekulow, taking your calls, 1-800-684-3110. And remember, matching challenge month of November. Whatever you can donate today is doubled. A group of donors will match those donations the entire month. Donate today, if you can, at aclj.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 213. The Build Back Better bill is passed.
The estimate from the Congressional Budget Office just came in minutes ago. The total spending in this bill is $1.7 trillion. That's about what we expected. However, something that we did not necessarily expect, that the bill would add $367 billion to the deficit.
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget is scoring the BBB bill at $4.9 trillion. The Penn-Warden model scoring it at $4 trillion.
One of the things that the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton study does is it takes out the budget gimmicks. We all know, no matter what the CBO says, they put budget gimmicks in to deliberately try to mislead and make it look different.
If the way that we could make prosperity wider and bigger in the country is to spend more money, why are we stopping at $1.75 trillion? Why not spend more?
The part that they're arguing about in the CBO score is how aggressive 85,000 IRS agents are going to be in coming after every American's money. And that's 8.5 divisions. That will double the size of the IRS.
Do you think they're going to go after those rich people who are now getting the state and local tax deduction and billions in tax savings? No, they're going to go after the average people. And then look at, just the size of the civilian climate corps. These are going to be people otherwise known as, I call them, the civilian climate militia. They're larger, almost twice the size as active duty Marines.
In this bill, we don't have this Hyde Amendment language. So your taxpayer dollars, my taxpayer dollars, would be going to be paying for abortion with this bill.
Unfortunately, it's sort of a sinking ship, but we're all on this ship together. So now we have to figure out how to get our country back on track.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are taking your phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. So, listen, Build Back Better gets passed in the U.S. House. Now, the surprise there was that the moderates and the progressives were able to come together. As Stan said, the moderates had their excuse for what they were going to vote for, and they didn't mind the fact that it's going to actually cost billions of dollars after they got the CBO report. That's what they were holding out for. But now it goes to a tougher place. That's the 50-50 divided U.S. Senate. And it's not just one Democrat senator, but two who have expressed a lot of concern about the amount of spending here, the inflation going on in our country right now, and whether this is the best way to tackle that. Like, for instance, is the Green New Deal the best way to tackle the out-of-control gas prices at the pump right now? Instead of even Chuck Schumer supports utilizing the strategic petroleum reserves. And what I've heard from people in the oil and gas industry is that wouldn't even necessarily be necessary if they were just allowed to deliver the oil to keep it pumping at a level where the Biden administration, though, was trying to kill that industry.
Well, we were totally independent, energy independent, a year ago. I mean, you realize this. A year ago, we were totally energy independent.
And prices were low.
And, I mean, was it $2.12 a gallon or whatever it was? I mean, now it's, I mean, I was driving somewhere, it may have been towards North Carolina. I think it was some was over $4.
Yeah, and if you get out West Coast, it can be up to $7.
The taxes. But look, I mean, this is all part and parcel of what at the ACLJ, our Office of Government. This is a good day to focus on the Office of Government Affairs. By the way, in the next segment, we're going to be talking about a case we're filing on a pro-life matter that's been filed today. So a lot going on. Rick Rennell's joining us in the back half. But, Than, I think it's important for people to understand that although that one provision that we fought so hard to keep out, we've had a good success. And by the way, I need to say this. Than was very engaged on that issue, as he's engaged in all these issues. But this one, we particularly took an interest in because we of any institution would know about potential abuse from the Internal Revenue Service because we handled those cases. And then I did that hearing. I'll never forget it. Then it was in the next room to the studio. We did it by Zoom. It was before Ways and Means, I believe. And then I came in and gave a report from it here. It was amazing the technology that our team was able to put together. But what was so great about that was it got attention to an issue that would have impacted literally every American.
Yeah, it's why we paid so much attention to this, Jay. It was going to impact the lives of literally every American. And look, Democrats were never going to call an official hearing on this. So what the minority members of the Ways and Means Committee did is they got with you and they said, look, let's bring attention to this matter. Maybe we can get it stripped out of this bill. Look, there's going to be a lot of other things in this bill that are going to need to be focused on, but we've got to get this one out because otherwise we'll be giving authority to an agency like the IRS, who we know will target conservatives, who we know will target Christians. We've got to make sure that it's scrubbed. I'm sure that was a very full day on your end, Jay. But look, at the end of the day, it was successful. That provision came out. And now, look, Jordan alluded to this. They were trying to pre-negotiate this whole package between House Democrats and Senate Democrats. Jay, they failed to do that. And at the end, they actually shoved a bunch of things into this bill that are going to make it harder to pass the Senate, things that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema specifically oppose. So we're going to see how that all plays out. There's going to be a number of policy debates, spending, taxes, the Hyde Amendment. It's also going to have to survive some budgetary rules. But, Jay, you have to take these things on one step at a time. We got a big win on that. There's going to be more ahead, so stay tuned.
But you know what's interesting there? The House Democrats themselves had to get over internal fighting in order to get their bill passed because for a lot of them, this wasn't enough. So, I mean, right. I mean, this is half of what they wanted.
They wanted another $1.5 trillion.
Yeah.
Now, I think, let me do this real quick. For our Facebook audience, I know that most of you are listening on radio and Sirius XM, but for those who watch the broadcast through different channels, Facebook had a little delay through their server. It wasn't your computer. It wasn't our computers, just through their server. It's up now at the Jay Sekulow page on Facebook, so we encourage you, if that's where you usually watch, and if you're watching there now, help us get the numbers up there because we had a delay start by sharing the broadcast with your friends and family. We've got a great update coming up in the next segment about a pro-life case we're working on. Rick Grinnell joining us in the second half hour on some of these foreign policy discussions, especially related to China, the upcoming Olympics there, the ongoing genocide there, and even a story that really, it just shows the strength of China, even to U.S. companies. This one, you just don't want to miss the show today. As we get through all of these different issues. So I encourage you to share it with your friends and family. Yeah, we'll be talking about the lawsuit in the next segment with Frank Mannion from our team. Let me play this for you. So a reporter asked about the CBO, and you said, the American people, they want it scored at 0. It is not scored at 0. Take a listen. Bite 9.
How do you respond to Republicans today that say Democrats lied to the American public when they said this plan costs $0 when the CBO says it at least adds $160 billion to the debt?
Let's just not present what the Republicans say as any fact that you're predicating a question on. I mean, understand what's happening around here, okay?
I mean, Than, we just talked about that it wasn't some Republican fact. It's the Congressional Budget Office, and it was moderate Democrats saying they're waiting for that score.
Jordan, there are a bunch of sophisticated outfits that have put out scores on this. Guess what the lowest, the most conservative score on this? It's the Congressional Budget Office. I mean, the other scores are somewhere between $4 trillion and $5 trillion for actual costs because they don't believe the federal government when they say we're going to sunset these programs after 5 years. Of course they're not going to sunset them. They never do. So the real cost is going to be more than $4 trillion. But, Jordan, what is Speaker Pelosi going to say? Her members said, we want to wait on the CBO score. It's got to be deficit neutral so we can spend a whole bunch of money as long as we collect a lot of taxes from the American people to pay for it, which, by the way, I think that's a double whammy, not one good thing and one bad thing. But the score came back, Jordan, and it said what Republicans said. It's going to be hugely expensive. It's going to be high taxation. And the third whammy, it's going to add to the deficit. The CBO agreed, and her members voted for it anyway. So, I don't feel sorry in the least for Speaker Pelosi, but at the same time, there wasn't a way that she could answer that question that was going to put her in a good light.
No, I mean, this is, again, and she gets pressed again for the speeches. Take a listen, Bite 8.
You used to hold the record for the longest floor speech. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that being broken, and do you plan to try to take that back?
No, I barely noticed, but that's not what we're here to talk about. This is about serious business here.
You realize where the press is. I mean, you want any examples of how praising the press is to the far left, and I'd say Pelosi's crossed over there with this $2 trillion spending, that they laugh about floor speech numbers when they're talking about spending $2 trillion more dollars at a time when there's rapid inflation, problems with our entire infrastructure when it comes to the supply chain. And by the way, they've got
that for Christmas. I mean,
they got no
very
answers
difficult
for
getting.
They got no answers for you. Is what Biden says for short-term solution. And then on top of all of that, the inflation numbers.
Highest in 30. The inflation rate right now is the highest I think they said in 30 years. Joe Biden's numbers are at 36%.
He's in the 30s in approval. Now let's get a little political for a second here, Than. I mean, it's very rare to see a president of the United States drop into that mid-30s number.
Yeah, and Jordan, it was, historically it's always problematic for a sitting president, especially when they control both chambers heading into a midterm. But guess what? With inflation going through the roof and Democrats in Washington, D.C. only offering one solution, and Jordan, it's one that's going to drive inflation even higher, put the squeeze on family budgets even more. I suspect that number for President Biden is going to go down, not up. And Jordan, one other thing, look, I just have to respond to Speaker Pelosi chuckling. Look, she can have a different view on this, but this is not funny. I mean, the CBO score came out late afternoon, and she wanted to put the vote on the floor to spend what is going to be north of $4 trillion just a few hours later. So you had the House version of a filibuster, Leader McCarthy speaking for 8.5 hours. Look, she can disagree with Leader McCarthy, Jordan, but it's not funny, and it's the American people that are going to pay the price.
$550 billion for climate change through incentives and tax breaks. $500 billion. In addition to what's already in these budgets. This is the new one. And, of course, they wanted more money for that. Employers are having enough problems getting employees, so now let's have mandatory 4 weeks of paid family and medical leave. Now, a lot of companies do that anyways, voluntarily. Why does the federal government have to start mandating this? It goes back to the conversation we had yesterday. So they didn't get what they wanted, but they still have been able to socially engineer, at least in the House of Representatives, their view of where this should go, where the country should go. But they're doing this, and this is what's so ironic, Jordan, they're doing this with a 36% approval rating by Joe Biden.
Well, this is the classic move. They either think that by one, they have to do this to placate their base, which is that should be higher than 36%. But again, the base doesn't like a lot of what they're doing. They don't think it's extreme enough. And they don't like what's going to happen in the Senate to this, which is likely it doesn't ever pass, or it's cut apart and taken apart, and then it goes back to the House and the war begins again. But they are falling into that direct trap of pushing legislation the American people don't want, that some people in their own party don't even want. And this happened to President Obama. Vice President Biden should remember what happens when you do this before midterm elections. The states that become the races that go into play are all over the country. I mean, we're not just talking about purple states anymore. It's everywhere.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The report is coming out. It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing, and now they were admitting it.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history. To take on the IRS and win, for the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue.
Barbara, I am here at this site because there are thousands of people and millions across America that say abortion's murder.
When you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side of history, you're on the right side of law.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life to beat back the abortion juggernaut.
It's very important that we remain hopeful that the courts that the Trump administration was able to impact will give us good rulings that are based in law and sound reasoning.
This is one of the social issues we're winning.
There are historians that point out that religious persecution is at its highest level since the first 3 centuries when the Roman Empire led religious persecution.
A mid-state pastor's family is fighting to bring him home.
We are getting my husband after 7.5 months.
Turkey should not get away with holding my father one more day.
When Brunson was finally released, who meets him at the airport at 2:30 in the morning? Rick Grinnell.
I saw Pastor Brunson walk down the stairs of the plane. I was filled with emotion. I told him that we were praying for him. The American people never forgot about him.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
So last year we told you about the city of Louisville, a failed attempt to crack down on pro-life sidewalk counselors, tried to use the COVID pandemic as cover. And then that did not ultimately go into the law. Then they didn't pass that. But the new city council, which has a different political balance, took up the buffer zone measure again this year. And this year's version of the ordinance makes no mention of the public health emergency. It was about alleged history of blocking and obstructing and harassing healthcare facilities. Well, we at the ACLJ represent those sidewalk counselors. Our senior counsel, Frank Mannion, joining us now because we have filed a lawsuit in federal court or in Kentucky. And Dad, this is
core ACLJ.
Core ACLJ going back.
Yes.
You fought at the Supreme Court, and
Multiple
we're right back
times.
here fighting at the district court.
You know, I just was going to say, as we have Frank come on here, you know, we were just talking about something at the national level where we worked hard to get a piece of legislation in the Democratic House modified so that it would take out the ability of the IRS to, you know, spy on, you know, and get access to every American's records if you had more than $800 in transactions. Initially, it was $600. In a single transaction. We got that out. We got to watch what they'll do regulatory. But then also at the same time we're doing that, we've got our lawyers like our senior counsel Frank Mannion and his team filing federal case in the Western District of Kentucky on an issue that's front and center for the ACLJ, and that is pro-life counseling outside of abortion clinics. Frank, tell us about the case.
Sure, Jay. You know, as you said, this is core ACLJ work. You've argued two of these cases at the Supreme Court. One of those, Hill versus Colorado, the cities and towns across the country are still focusing on, even though in 2014, in the McCullen versus Coakley case, a unanimous Supreme Court, including, you know, RBG and Sotomayor, placed sidewalk counseling by pro-lifers at the top of the hierarchy of free speech, right, and struck down a buffer zone ordinance in Massachusetts. And most importantly, in the context of this case, completely ignored Hill versus Colorado. In other words, they didn't explicitly overrule it, but essentially they said that case doesn't have any impact or any effect on what we're doing here. What's happening is local governments, like in Louisville, like in Englewood, New Jersey, where we're getting ready for a trial at the beginning of next year, have simply ignored the McCullen case. And in our case against Louisville, we're calling them to account and saying, you just can't do this. If you've got people breaking laws, obstructing, hindering, assaulting, harassing, go after them. You're easily capable of doing it. You don't shut down part of the traditional public forum to peaceful sidewalk counselors.
So, you know, you mentioned, because I think it's worth pointing out here, Frank, that I went to the Supreme Court twice on this. And then the third case came out, and there's probably a series of about 4 of these cases involving these buffer zones. We had the floating buffer zone, remember that one? And then you had, like, wherever anybody went, you couldn't talk to them, you couldn't hand them a piece of literature. So here's the question that I know what our audience is saying. Well, goodness, you all argued this at the Supreme Court. Then there were subsequent cases that even affirmed it even more, and you're still having to go back to the district court to enforce what the Supreme Court already said is the law of the land.
It's unbelievable, Jay. And what's happening is I think you have local governments giving into vociferous, well-funded, influential pro-abortion constituencies where they are. And we saw it in Englewood, New Jersey, and we're seeing it here in Louisville, Kentucky. And they're just ignoring what the Supreme Court said in McCullen. It's just amazing. We shake our heads and think this was a unanimous Supreme Court decision in an abortion case that went our way. That has never, ever happened. And so they just pretend it didn't happen. And they go back to the Hill case and to other cases that we've easily distinguished. And that's why we're hopeful that either we're going to get our preliminary injunction, we filed that motion today, or we're going to get this up to the Sixth Circuit, and we've got one going up into the Third Circuit too. And, you know, the way I see this, Jay, is this is going to be the chance for you to get back to the Supreme Court and finally have them drive the stake in the heart of the constitutional ghoul that is Hill versus Colorado.
Yeah, could you imagine? Finally, I mean, it was like before 30 years later, Frank.
Exactly.
I think I was 35 when I argued that thing. I'm 65. It's like, you know, it's like Groundhog's Day. It keeps coming back around.
Exactly.
Pat Monahan and I have been arguing these cases. You know how long now? Since 1985.
Yeah.
And I know you were doing those, Frank, back in the 80s. Exactly. So if my math is correct, what is that? 37 years?
I don't even want to think about it.
We look the same.
Exactly.
I will
maybe
say,
you do.
I said, Frank, one of the things I thought that was worth pointing out was that when last year, when this failed, they were trying to literally doing this when Louisville was experiencing massive protest after the verdict with Breonna Taylor, and then at the same time, this is how aggressive this pro-abortion movement is. Frank, I think it just shows that at the same time that was going on, like the streets were not being able to be under control, they were trying to get through this buffer zone.
Yeah, they're going after quiet, calm, caring, pro-life sidewalk counselors who just want to give women alternatives to abortion. And frankly, I think the reason they go after them is that they're successful at persuading women to not go through with abortion. 50 times a year, our clients have been successful in turning women around by offering them caring, loving alternatives to abortion. And so under the guise of trying to go after lawbreakers and obstructors and harassers, they really want to go after the sidewalk counselors because they are successful.
You know, it's interesting to me, Frank, as I reflect on this, and I want to thank our ACLJ members, because the truth of the matter is we could not do this without you, and it does take incredible perseverance. I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking about those early days of those cases, 37 years ago. And then in the 90s, it was a big issue again. I mean, the Shane case, and then, like you said, Hill versus Colorado, and then there was Madsen. Remember all those cases? And then you had I know you, Frank, and the team did around the country. And yet here we are again having to do this as we're actually winning on the abortion issue. And look, women facing a crisis moment in their lives, having an alternative to an abortion is really important. And I applaud those women that make that difficult choice sometimes for them. I mean, we think about it and we say, well, but we're not the person that's having that situation. And I applaud the willingness to have the child and bring that child to term. I've got 6 grandkids. I mean, the technology now, my brother-in-law Gary Hickson said this many, many years ago, the technology was going to get to such a point that they would never be able to, the pro-abortion crowd would never be able to deny that this was a child in the mother's womb. And that technology is there.
Yes, it is there. And it's making it more and more difficult for this movement to try and pull the rug over people's eyes. It's ultimately here. We fight all of these battles, and we've continued to fight all these battles because we believe in free speech. We believe in the rights of these sidewalk counselors. We believe in the ability. Also, we believe in the life of the unborn, and we believe that we should do everything we can to protect it. And whether that's supporting a case out of Texas, whether that's supporting the case out of Mississippi on December 1st at the Supreme Court, the Dobbs case, whether it's in South Dakota on informed consent. I mean, we are working on so many, and always have, on every single front when it comes to life. Every way legally possible, whether it's protecting your pro-life speech, whether it's protecting a pro-life viewpoint, whether it's actually fighting directly the abortion industry and late-term abortions and supporting that legislative bans on those late-term abortions. And now we've entered a new era where we can directly challenge Roe versus Wade. And the Supreme Court has decided they're actually going to hear, for the first time since Casey, a new challenge right on its face to Roe versus Wade. Folks, we are gaining momentum in this fight. It doesn't mean we'll win every battle, but we're gaining momentum, and we need your support. Donate at aclj.org, our matching challenge month of November. Double your impact today. That's aclj.org. We'll be right back.
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
I still remember staring up at that bright light and counting backwards from 10.
In reality, what abortion is the taking of an unborn child's life.
I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want anyone to know.
You're destroying the unborn and committing murder.
This really is a filthy business.
America will look back on this season in history and will be mortified about what happened in the abortion industry.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. So far already on the broadcast today, we've broken down what the House was able to pass last night, this Build Back Better plan, $2 trillion. CBO, which was on the lower side of how much this would cost, said it's in the over $100 billion it's going to cost. Some estimates have it like at $800 billion. But I want to go back real quick to Than on this, because Than, it's a major power grab for the IRS. We have been able to remove the provisions for the IRS to be able to just go right into your bank account without having to get a court order. First they wanted it for $600 worth of transactions. That got nixed. Then it was $10,000 in aggregate, which is basically the same thing, because over a year, most people, if you are in the IRS system paying taxes, taking in any kind of income, you've got that amount of transactions over a year. That was taken out, but the power grab by the IRS. So I think it's important to point out, then, they're getting $80 billion new dollars. That is not that far off from their yearly budget right now. It's almost as if we are doubling the size of the IRS if this were to pass the Senate, and we're adding 87,000 new enforcement agents. And we've heard from the administration, they think that even though they couldn't get those provisions in to get into everybody's bank accounts, they're going to try to do it through regulation. We say if that ever becomes law, this Build Back Better plan, and they try to do that through regulation, we will fight it, and we're pledging to do that right now. But then, I mean, this is, again, it's the big question is, does any of this survive the U.S. Senate? And do you see that provision surviving if others are cut?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jordan, you're right. I mean, the IRS language, it's a two-edged sword. First of all, it's very important for us to get that most problematic language out. But look, the $80 billion and 87,000 new agents that they're going to hire, that could be problematic, very problematic, Jordan, in another way. I mean, we did the math on this. If you hire 87,000 agents with the $45 billion of enforcement that's in the bill, each agent, Jordan, would have more than $500,000 a year to conduct audits. So what that means is a whole bunch of people that never met the threshold or the risk level before for getting an audit are going to get an audit under this plan if it's enacted. So that's hugely problematic. We're going to continue to focus on it. To answer your questions about the Senate, Jordan, first on that provision, yes, I think there's an opportunity for that to come out. Senator Manchin was very influential with the president, saying this is the snooping provision has to come out. I think he could be effective in getting that provision out of the Senate as well. But now, look, will it pass the Senate? I think there's an opportunity for it to pass the Senate. But if it does, Jordan, it's going to look dramatically different. They're going to have to come up with something that satisfies all 50 senators, including both the progressives like Bernie Sanders and then Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. But here's the thing, Jordan, they've got to do that while simultaneously satisfying Senate budgetary rules known as the bird bath. And, Jordan, they've got to pass something that can go back to this House that just passed this narrow version and pass the new version. So there's a lot of hurdles ahead. And here's the thing that we've got to do. We've got to make sure we take every point in that legislative process to try to remove the most damaging provisions here.
You know, let me go to the phones. Actually, we're going to do it when we come back from the break. So, Alan, we'll get right back to you when we come back from this break. Let me encourage you.
Rick Rennell's going to be joining us.
Yeah, Rick Rennell is going to be joining us the next segment of the broadcast. We're getting some international news as well and what's going on around the world, especially with China and more. So we're going to talk to Rick. But first, let me encourage you right now. You've heard just today a snippet of the work that we're doing at the ACLJ, and it's a lot of different kinds of work. We do all of this because of your financial support to the ACLJ. We wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have the attorneys. As Frank was talking about a case out of New Jersey, then the case filing in Kentucky, the government affairs work we're doing. I mean, it's just a snippet of a day in the ACLJ. But it's your ability, again, because of your financial support, And I only ask this if you're financially able to do it. Because of you, we're able to do all this work. So this is the month. It's a great month to do it. It's a matching challenge month in the month of November. You double the impact of your donation. We have a group of donors that say, hey, Jordan, if you go donate $30 right now at aclj.org, we're going to match it. So it's like you donate $60 because you triggered that matching challenge. Donate today, aclj.org. We'll be back with Rick Renell.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 213. The Build Back Better bill is passed.
The estimate from the Congressional Budget Office just came in minutes ago. The total spending in this bill is $1.7 trillion. That's about what we expected. However, something that we did not necessarily expect, that the bill would add $367 billion to the deficit.
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget is scoring the BBB bill at $4.9 trillion. The Penn-Warden model scoring it at $4 trillion.
One of the things that the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton study does is it takes out the budget gimmicks. We all know, no matter what the CBO says, they put budget gimmicks in to deliberately try to mislead and make it look different.
If the way that we could make prosperity wider and bigger in the country is to spend more money, why are we stopping at $1.75 trillion? Why not spend more?
The part that they're arguing about in the CBO score is how aggressive 85,000 IRS agents are going to be in coming after every American's money. And that's 8.5 divisions. That will double the size of the IRS.
Do you think they're going to go after those rich people who are now getting the state and local tax deduction and billions in tax savings? No, they're going to go after the average people. And then look at, just the size of the civilian climate corps. These are going to be people otherwise known as, I call them, the civilian climate militia. They're larger, almost twice the size as active duty Marines.
In this bill, we don't have this Hyde Amendment language. So your taxpayer dollars, my taxpayer dollars, would be going to be paying for abortion with this bill.
Unfortunately, it's sort of a sinking ship, but we're all on this ship together. So now we have to figure out how to get our country back on track.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined by our senior advisor for foreign policy and national security, Rick Renell, to talk about a host of issues. Rick, right off the bat, I want to talk about China and tie in both the Olympics, but something that was really outrageous that occurred in Prague. The Marriott Hotel in Prague refused to host a Uyghur Muslim conference, citing political neutrality. So a Marriott in Prague and the Marriott company is so worried about China, I guess, kicking them out of the Chinese market, that they would not allow a group that is being systematically executed and exterminated. It is genocide in China of these Uyghurs from hosting a conference, not in China at a Marriott, but at a Marriott in Prague. Ultimately, they were able to find another hotel.
Yeah, but they shouldn't have had to do that.
To me, Rick, it show that right there is the example of Chinese power. We got a little audio problem with Rick.
Yeah, so
we'll
check
go back in.
that.
Make sure.
I'm going to tell you what that Rick. We'll see if we can get that fixed. If we'll check that out. But it does show their power because the Uyghurs are terribly persecuted. It's known around the globe that this is a problem. The Chinese government also has been very clear in not responding to pressure. And the fact is that this wasn't even, as you said, Jordan, in China. This was in Prague.
And the Marriott cited political neutrality.
Well, how is it
how
neutral?
many Marriotts have you been to with political events in the U.S.? I mean, they don't. That's definitely not their policy here.
No,
I wouldn't think it was their policy.
And Democrats,
kind of bizarre that it's their policy in Prague over some political activity in China. But Rick, to me, let me just go back to you. That's serious power when U.S. companies are so afraid of doing anything that could upset China that they will not allow this group that's being persecuted to hold a conference halfway across the world.
Look, it's happening in Europe, and I wonder if it would be able to happen here in the United States. I'm all for companies getting to choose who comes and who doesn't come, but I think that people need to realize that there are consequences to Marriott deciding that they want to stay politically neutral. I haven't seen Marriott stay politically neutral on the cancel culture, for instance, in the United States. Certainly, there are groups that they don't want at their properties that are affiliated with Donald Trump, and we've seen some of those examples. But I think you got to live and die by your choices. And if Marriott decides that they don't want to take a harsh stance against China, they might have some NBA players that will come and visit their properties, but I think they're going to find a lot of other Americans and Europeans are going to say, that's not what I value and I don't want to stay there. We can vote with our pocketbook.
You know, one of the conference organizers for the Uyghurs here said that they were, stunned by the response of the Marriott Corporation, and which is stunning, actually, and we've all stayed at Marriott's. I mean, it's not like that we haven't stayed at Marriott's. And, the Marriott Corporation and the Marriott family should understand religious freedom because it was a company that's leadership is Mormon. Yeah. The Church of Latter-day Saints. Yeah. And that's always been, religious freedom's always been a big issue for the Mormons. Now you've got a group that's being systematically having their lives ended. They are literally placed in concentration camps. And as you all know, I do not use that term lightly because I had family that died in concentration camps. And an American corporation buckles to China. Rick?
Look, this is the growing power of China, especially in Europe. And I think what we have to be able to do is recognize and articulate that the Chinese system is not a free system. Let's be really honest. I mean, they deny systematically access to the internet. They have human rights abuses. And we have a whole bunch of American companies who go and open up markets in China, collect a lot of money, but they don't take a stand like they do in America. And I think that they have to be able to live and die by this sword. If you're going to work inside China, if you're going to have a company that's based in China, the Chinese Communist Party requires you to have a Chinese partner. And that partner is obligated to turn over information, activities, all of that to the Chinese Communist Party. That's just a fact. You don't get to do work in China and pretend like you're just there to do business and push capitalism because your Chinese partner is beholden to the Communist Party of China.
I'd like to go to, do you have any follow-up on China? I was going to go to Iran because this is another one. Go ahead.
The final question I had on China, Rick, was that we know that the Olympics is going to take place, Winter Olympics there. I know there's been calls for the U.S. not to participate. There's been calls maybe for U.S. delegates not to attend, but to still let our athletes who have trained attend. But again, to me, it's like the pre-event, this Olympics, to a real potential new Chinese aggression. It's like they're waiting to take action in Taiwan until after they can show the world and put on their propaganda campaign.
Look, we've been talking about the Olympics now for 18 months, and I think that you have to make a quick decision and let our athletes know that we're boycotting if that's the policy that we're going to push. I believe now it's a little too late. Our athletes have been training, and it wouldn't be fair to deny the athletes that venue. I will say, though, there are things that we can do. How about a corporate ban? We could bar U.S. companies from giving any money to the Olympics and supporting them and squeezing them where possible.
No, I think that's great. I want to go to Iran. So here we go. We know the Biden administration is trying to get cozy with Iran again. We've been talking about that with you for months here. Now we've got a report, not a report. The Justice Department has indicted 2 Iranian nationals for, attempted interference in the 2020 election that includes influencing alleged Republican lawmakers, Democratic voters, American news outlets. The indictment was unsealed on Thursday. The state Treasury Department's now imposing new sanctions on 6 Iranian people and 1 Iranian entity. These were aggressive attempts. According to the indictment, the Iranian conspirators sought to compromise 11 state voter registration and voter information websites in September and in October of 2020 and say successfully exploited computers in one unnamed state. Now, no one's, no special counsels on all of this, but they did indict him. Good for them. But this all comes while the Biden administration is begging at the table to get a deal with Iran.
Look, this is the hypocrisy of Washington, D.C., because what we heard during the Russia collusion hoax was a blanket punishment of Russia, no doing business because of the misinformation and propaganda campaigns that they were pushing. Now we see an aggressive Iranian regime activity, and there's all but silence from the implications of what that means for our policy. If we're going to be consistent, then we should shut down any negotiations on the nuclear deal to punish the Iranian regime for their manipulation of the American election. Yeah. We need to be consistent here. And the problem is that Washington, D.C. has only one standard, and it's a double standard.
But here's the two men were charged, Rick, and we only got 2 minutes here, accused of obtaining confidential voter information from at least one state's election website, getting data on more than 100,000 voters. The state was not identified in the indictment, but 100,000 voters' information was compromised by the Iranians while the Biden administration is sitting there trying to have negotiations with them.
Look, this is not going to go over well in Europe if we pull the plug, but I believe that there should be consequences that are applied equally when we find that individuals are manipulating or trying to manipulate our elections. Clearly, this is the case, and the silence is deafening from Washington, D.C. We need to be able to have State Department types, John Kerry, Anthony Blinken, and all of the others who are trying to push negotiations with Iran to look at these issues and to be able to say there is a reaction from Americans because of your activities trying to influence our election. Let's be fair and let's apply the standard across the board.
Rick, it's always great to have you on the broadcast. We appreciate your insight, your input. And again, as always, let me just encourage people. The reason why we've got people like Rick Riddell, former acting director of national intelligence, think about the issues we just talked about with him globally, and people like Secretary Pompeo, it's because your financial support to the American Center for Law and Justice. We're able to continue to increase our team, the expertise of our team as well. And yes, we talk a lot, with them on the broadcast, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of work that they do behind the scenes as well, Rick and Mike, that you don't see. I'm being on a call with Rick on Monday with a team of our lawyers from Europe on a potentially major matter. That's, again, something we can't talk about on radio yet. So they're not just here to talk, but they are part of the team, support our work. We want to continue to expand. We want to continue to grow so we can take on all these challenges and take them on in the best way possible. Support our work. We have the Matching Challenge month of November. It's at aclj.org, and right there you can see all the work that we're doing. aclj.org. Donate today. We'll be right back.
Build Back Better is fully paid for. It reduces the deficit.
It's fully paid for. Fully paid. It does not increase the deficit one single cent.
The CBO estimates the bill will add $367 billion of the deficit over the next 10 years.
I think most Americans are saying, Build Back Better. Look, man, just put it back the way you found it, okay?
Other sources that look at this in a realistic fashion say, first of all, it's not a $1.75 trillion bill. It's anywhere between $4.5 to $5 trillion, depending on the source.
They're using phony baloney accounting. They're creating all these new programs. They say, oh, but these are going to only last for 4 or 5 years. When you know this, Bill, once you create a government program, it's almost impossible to get rid of it.
If the way to gain prosperity is to spend our way to it, why not spend more? Look, this is based on a fraud. It is an expansion of the welfare state, not an expansion of the prosperity state.
Inflation affects 100% of us. And we know that people across the country are feeling this everywhere. Gas is more expensive. Thanksgiving dinner is going to be more expensive.
We, again, are not talking economics. We're talking about a large government, a big state that oversees all of us. that they know better than all of us.
87,000 IRS agents. Larry, who has asked you or any of them? I've never gotten a phone call of people going, please put 87,000 more IRS agents out there looking into people's bank accounts.
They do not care about what's going on with working families and fixed income seniors. They only care about the agenda first, second, and third, and then they will lie to you and tell you that it's going to be the best thing for you.
We always talk about this as an economic thing. This is more about control. This is more about big government, and this is an effort to take the welfare society and move it up into the middle class.
Right to the phones. Alan's been holding on. Alan from Minnesota. So if you got more to say, Alan, I know you heard a lot of our discussion. We'll give you the time to do so.
Well, right. Well, thank you. My question is this. Over and over again in the Senate and in the House both, they've been proposing these massive bills, thousands of pages, huge price tags, and with having all kinds of different ramifications, with very little time to actually review the legislation. My question is, are the legislators, Senate or House, who are actually voting on these things, taking the time, or even having the time, to read them and understand what they're voting on?
I want to go to Thad on this because, Thad, I want to kind of explain it through two ways. I think, one, a lot of them rely on their conference. So you rely on the Democratic conference to kind of walk you through. But you've worked on Capitol Hill. Are there offices that do put, I mean, sometimes it'd be impossible for one person in the time that they have, but offices that put together a group and then go through it? They do the right thing?
There are offices that try to do that, Jordan. There are also coalitions of offices. They kind of band together and break it up and try to read through it. But look, I mean, I'll just answer Alan's question as honestly as I can. It would be physically impossible, even in a combined capacity like that, to have read this bill that they passed yesterday in its final form, Jordan, in the time that was afforded to them. And here's why. I mean, the Rules Committee was waiting for the CBO score to put out a rule for debate on this. That rule didn't come until almost the dinner hour last night, and then it was on the floor by 8 p.m. Now, look, a lot of this text had been available in various forms and in various combinations as you go along. But, Jordan, when you're putting out, one 2,500-page bill and then one 2,800-page bill and then one 3,000-page bill, it doesn't make any sense to read them in piecemeal form. You need to know the final form if you're going to try to do the due diligence that Alan is talking about. The way this happened yesterday, Jordan, there is physically no way that a single member of the House of Representatives read that entire bill in its final form before they had to vote on it.
So, I mean, there you go, Alan. It's that no single person could do it. There are offices that try to do the right thing. I mean, so I think that there are members and their staffs who try to do the right thing. But ultimately here, the way that this has been played, especially by Democrats since the Affordable Care Act, is find out what's in it after you pass it. Exactly. And Nancy Pelosi said that about this bill. She said, ultimately, the American people will like it once they figure out what's in it. I mean, it's the same kind of statement.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Ken on Facebook said, it looks like Erdogan, because we didn't get a chance to talk about that, in Turkey, who's the economy is once again in real trouble, won't make it through the next election because of the economy. Will this cause more destabilization in the region? He is a destabilizing force in the region, to be quite frank, and I'm glad, Ken, you brought this up. We have a lot of expertise in Turkey. We've written a book on Turkey called Burning Bridges, and that's exactly what the Turkish regime has done. They have burnt bridges. They were a bridge to Europe. They are no longer that.
They Islamicized.
They were a country that was under Ataturk was very secular in its approach. There was more religious freedom then, and the Jewish community in Turkey's pretty much gone. The Christian community is down to literally 3,000. This was one of the central places of Christendom. The Orthodox Church is headquarters. It's in Constantinople, but yet Erdogan, who continues to put pressure on his people, is trying to manipulate the own economy. This time, though, it backfired.
Yeah.
The question is, does that cause more destabilization in the region? And I think Erdogan gone would actually be more of a stabilizing force, depending on who's behind him.
Yes, I always like to say, what I want to do more, because I've seen these news reports pop up really in the last day or two, and it's about the Turkish lira just taking a dive, even though they've been making cuts, trying to cut the rate by just 1%, and it's lost a third of its value since March. So imagine if your dollar bill has lost a third of its value throughout the world too. We're not just talking about inflation. We're talking about what it is if you tried to trade it for a different kind of currency, or if you were buying goods at one rate, well, now it's cost a third more. So this could be a serious challenge to a strong man who appeared to be setting himself up for kind of the Putin-style leader for life situation. But as my dad cautioned, let me always caution on these issues involving Turkey and anywhere in that region of the world. What now we have to do is look at who would be likely successors to Erdogan. Some would probably be bad. Some would probably be great. Who actually has the best chance? Because what he did was he ushered in a new era of embracing Islam and mixing it with politics.
Yes.
He brought back the burqas. And again, you know, in what instance we allow that kind of religious liberty and freedom in our country, I would never think of not allowing it. But he brought it back as this symbol of it's no longer Ataturk's Turkey.
Yeah, so Akan Ademir, you remember him? It was a fellow at, I think, Hudson. As this situation develops, he was one of our fellows at our Oxford Center as well. He's an expert on this area, and as this situation develops, we will keep an eye on it. But then you touched this issue directly. We had Pastor Brunson. We've had a lot of dealings on the Turkish front. This it is getting news. I mean, people are starting to hear about it. It could be a big deal in the next 30 days.
It could be, Jay, and as I was thinking about this, I think there's actually a lot of symmetry between the Brunson situation and the one we're facing, mainly because that was the last time that the lira really started to collapse in Turkey, and it was because President Trump took the detention, the imprisonment of Pastor Brunson so seriously and said, I'm going to sanction it. And the lira started to collapse, and lo and behold, President Erdogan started to talk, and Andrew Brunson was eventually released. Now, as the lira collapsed, though, Jay, I mean, I think the symmetry is that the people just aren't going to stand for it. I mean, when the pressure started happening the last time, they demanded that Pastor Brunson be released. Now they're standing up and saying, look, this may not be the right guy to lead our country. You definitely need a stabilizing force in that region, Jay. But as Jordan says, I mean, look, it's certainly unstable now. Would the replacement be more stable? You just don't know at this point.
And that's like the situation. I mean, I hate to say this. It's like the situation in Syria. I mean, you just don't know if the person behind it is going to be worse than the person you're dealing with. But having said that, you know, we're obviously on top of it, and we've done a lot of work there. Debbie on Facebook asked this question, fan, what do you think happens in the Senate with this bill? I guess let's bring that to closure for the weekend. What do you think?
Well, they're going to move to it right after Thanksgiving, and they're saying, Jay, that they want to try to be done with it by Christmas. I mean, look, you know what deadlines in D.C. mean, not a whole lot. I'll tell you this, they've got a lot of work to do on it. I mean, they've got to come to a policy agreement. They've got to survive budgetary rules. At the bottom line, a ton of stuff is going to have to come out of this bill for it to even comply, and then they're going to have to get all 50 senators on board. You know, when I try to predict these things, Jay, and it's sort of a fool's errand to do it, but when I try to predict them, I almost always predict on the side that some form of spending will pass, and so you want to try to make that as least damaging as possible. But can they pass something out of the Senate that also survives in the House? I mean, I guess if I were forced to predict, I would say maybe something slimmed down. But, Jay, it's far from certain, and there's just a lot of work ahead on it to scrub some of the worst provisions. That's the bottom line.
I mean, look what we discussed today. Iran, Turkey, congressional action on a bill with the IRS would have been in everybody's business. China. And we also filed a lawsuit defending pro-life speakers.
That's a one-hour broadcast. That's what we can tell you that we've done today at the ACLJ. And
not to mention the phone call we're about to go on as soon as we're done.
That's right, about another major matter. And at aclj.org, you can see all the work that we're doing. It's a great resource to go. But let me encourage you right now, as we are finishing out the week, we have our matching challenge month of November. This is a critical time for the ACLJ. If you are in a financial position to donate, to make a financial contribution, it's a great time to do it because you can double the impact of your donation. Our group of donors said we're going to match every donation that comes through in November. Will you make that donation? If you will, aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We will talk to you tomorrow.